back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We haven't had a lot of Ravens news, but there was news, but there's a dump, and it happens after dark at 10 o'clock or 6:15 on a Friday afternoon. But they do make news out in Owings Mills, and we still cover it. We're going to be getting back out, having a Maryland Crab Cake tour. I am promising all sorts of things when we get this thing going. I keep saying Nacho Mama's going to get it first. They are. It is all going to be presented by the Maryland Lottery. I'm going to have scratch-offs for the Monopoly. We're going to monopolize as well and do all sorts of things. Fun, political, music, arts. We have Ron Legler on from the Hippodrome this week. We just had great conversations. But I still go back to sports. I still go back to the Ravens and what's going on there. And this defensive coordinator search didn't feel like much of a search, Luke Jones, did it?
Yeah, I mean, they certainly did their homework, and they did interview some outside candidates. That it's not as though this was a one-man race, but I mean, from the moment they fired Wink Martindale last Friday at what was that, 6 o'clock, the classic Friday news dump, although it's not the same thing in the social media world.
No, hang on,
I think
dude.
one
That's
of the first
3
names.
o'clock Pacific. I mean, you know what I mean? Come on. It's 6 o'clock, so.
But I think one of the names that came up immediately, understanding that the Ravens hadn't hired an external defensive coordinator since the very beginning, Marvin coming over from Pittsburgh in 1996. But Mike Macdonald was a name that was brought up immediately, did a nice job for Jim Harbaugh down at Michigan. At the time of his departure, yes, the Ravens were high on him, but I don't think there was a sense where they thought Wink was definitely leaving. I thought there was certainly a possibility of him getting a head coaching job, but we've covered that. But Mike Macdonald at age 34, the eighth and the youngest defensive coordinator in Ravens history. And it is wild to think that in now 26 years, going on 27 seasons of Ravens football, they've only had 8 defensive coordinators. I mean, some teams have had well more head coaches than that. So it does speak to the stability of the organization. But at 34 years old, you are talking about a younger coach. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. I don't think anyone really knows how good of a NFL defensive coordinator Macdonald's going to be. I think anyone who says they do is lying to themselves. What he did at Michigan was impressive, but ask Urban Meyer coaching in the Big Ten compared to doing it at the NFL level. It's a little bit different, but clearly this is someone they have familiarity with. Clearly this isn't your traditional, quote, outside hire, because he did spend 7 years here as an assistant, but it amounts to him having a residency, an internship down at Michigan, and he comes back to Baltimore a year later and he's running the show. So it'll be fascinating. And I think the big thing, the clear task for him is going to be improving an injury-plagued Ravens defense that, let's face it, was not very good in 2021. And we can try to parcel out and distribute and discuss the reasons why, the different variables that were at work there, but they need to be better. And it's not going to be easy because he's not coming into a situation with a Ray Lewis in his prime or an Ed Reed in his prime or Terrell Suggs or Haloti Ngata for that matter. So it's not a clean slate. The cupboard's not completely bare, but certainly they're getting younger. They're transitioning. They're rebuilding this defense. And Mike Macdonald is the one that they've pinpointed to lead it moving forward here. Going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
All right, Luke. So I'll say this on them. I'm going to bless this hire, and I'm going to bless it for this reason. They're really smart about this stuff. I'll bless it because I was once a young whippersnapper, and Marvin was a young whippersnapper at that time, and black. And John Harbaugh was a young whippersnapper at one point, and Eric DeCosta very much, who he and I were young whippersnappers together with Phil Savage, who was a young whippersnapper of his own, as was George Kokinis, as was Josh McDaniels, as was Sean Payton, as was John Gruden, I'm just going down the list of all the young whippersnappers who were pretty sharp. And then I think about where Harbaugh is in his life and DeCosta is in his life, that they like young whippersnappers. And I'm wearing my Coon shirt, so I want to give some love to Dennis, because everybody that listens knows that Dennis comes on. I come on his show. He comes on mine. He's here on Thursdays. A great reason we still exist here all these years later, in partnerships with people like Coons and people like Royal Farms and people like Wise that keep us going. But Dennis and I had a leadership conversation the other day. And it's very, very natural. He and I get into these things a lot of times on his show on Thursday. And this was before Brian took the gig at Arizona, right? So this was last week in the Wink aftermath to say, okay, John hires from within. Brian, and we juxtaposed it. Brian hired people he didn't know. John only hires people that are somewhere in a Harbaugh tree or one limb away from being, there, right? And it's a different strategy. It really is. Then Brian takes this gig to go Old Family in Arizona with Marvin and Donnie Henderson. I didn't know Donnie was on the staff. I got to call and get him on the show. And Herm Edwards and Ray Anderson, who's really the patriarch of all of that. And it's relationship. And I say to Brian, at this point in your life, you're going back to what you know, and that there's a comfort. I've had you around for a long time, and it's good and it's comfortable and it's what we do and our audience and whatever. And people like to be around people they like to be around. I don't want a new Oriole and Raven reporter every year, but the Baltimore Banner might, or the Baltimore Sun might. But there's familiarity and keeping the same people around. I had Jerome Bettis on. He was promoting asthma and fresh air. And obviously we're going to the Super Bowl next week, so I'll be in LA. And I spoke to him about the Ravens and the Steelers like they don't ever change. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger was handing the ball to Bettis, and he's just getting off the field now talking about it. There's this stability thing that comes along with knowing it. So I'm going to bless it for this reason, Luke. And I'm just going to say, because I don't know anything about Mike Macdonald. I mean, we've been in a plague for 2 years. I don't even know John Harbaugh anymore. He didn't know my hair's long. So I'll say this. I'll bless it because this is their will, right? This is what they clearly, when they dismissed Wink last week, they're like, this is what we want to do. This is our desired. They did this on offense, not on defense. This was not a backup plan. This was the plan. And this was something that they wanted to execute and something that they felt we'd be better off going with this as opposed to that, because that wasn't working and Wink wasn't happy, or whatever the politics of Wink said too much in press conferences about Joe Burrow, or Wink was a little bit too not conservative and not, I don't know. I do know this. This is an all in the family thing. This is the way John hires. This is the way he wins. He always wins. He's a winner. That's why he's here. Right. So for me to say it doesn't work, in the same way to say whatever Pittsburgh's doing or whatever Sean Payton did, things that last a long time, there is some success there. And so I'll bless it in that this is what they want. And they love this guy. They love it. John's putting his reputation on the line with a 34-year-old guy that he took in diapers in his 20s. And this is the only, and I've never seen John glow in a press release quite the way I did at 11 p.m. on Thursday night, Luke. I mean, he really was effusive in this. So I'm going to bless it and saying this is really what they want to do. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care as much about the press release or things of that nature. But to me, I think it's interesting to look at it from the standpoint of, yes, John does hire guys that he's familiar with, but think about his past defensive coordinator hires. Okay, he kept Rex Ryan around for a year. Rex goes off to New York. Greg Madison, much older coach. Chuck Pagano, even though he hadn't been with the Ravens terribly long, or had been around a long time. I mean, Chuck was, I think, well into his 40s when he was Ravens defensive coordinator. Dean Pease had been around a long time. Wink had been around a long time. I mean, this guy's 34 now. He'd been with the Ravens 7 years, but he was a defensive coaching intern when he arrived in 2014. So this is different in that sense. And look at the other names that were reported out there that the Ravens talked to. I mean, they talked in-house to Anthony Weaver, who they just brought over from Houston a year ago. Chris Hewitt, who's been with the Ravens for a long time. They talked to Joe Cullen, who went down to Jacksonville with Urban Meyer, and even stepping outside the organization with guys maybe they aren't quite as familiar with. They talked to Chris Richard with the Saints, Joe Witt with the Cowboys, and Mike Caldwell, who actually played for the Ravens in 1996 and played with Harbaugh in Philadelphia. He's with the Bucks. They're
the Mike
either
Caldwell
inside
that was
or outside
drafted
linebackers
by the
coach.
Browns, huh? The Mike Caldwell that led to the Ray Lewis. Wow. Okay.
Right. So my point is he talked to other outside coaches, even though Mike Macdonald, you say external because he was gone for a year. But he talked to other in-house coaches who have been with him longer, who have more coaching experience. He talked to some outside coaches who had more experience, and they decided on this guy. Now, let's be very clear. John Harbaugh hasn't batted 1,000 with his coordinator hires. Now, the defensive coordinators have turned out well. He hired Mark Trestman. He hired Marty Morningwig. So we don't know. And this lends itself to what you just said. We'll sign off on it because he has a pretty good track record, but this could end up being a disaster. And I don't think it's going to be. Let's be clear about that.
Well, because somebody younger with that energy. I mean, to your point, having older people around and younger people around there, John's at a point where he wants a younger person around. If it's to boss him around, I mean, John is on a power thing. Come on, dude. We know where we are. Well, he runs the place and running. And that's his charge. He gets paid $10 million a year. He's about to get an extension. That's what he does, and this is the way he wants to do it. So, I just defer to some degree in saying this is what he's more comfortable with, and this is what he thinks he needs to do to win. He was 8-3 7 weeks ago, dude. Before his quarterback fell,
Yeah, sure.
So I look, I have a lot of differences with John, including the way PRs run and access and honesty, on a podium and all of that. And so the paranoia, I mean, all that's baked into this. But he wants to win football games, and I think that he sees this as a golden child, and he sees this guy's going to be a head coach when he's 39. In the next 4 years, he's going to be my coordinator, and I'm going to get him to the promised land. And he might be the next Ravens head coach here to hand it off to, maybe Eric loves him in that. Clearly they love him. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. I haven't talked to anybody, and they're all like dying to have a press conference now all of a sudden, right? Like next week, we're all going to be asking questions on the Zoom. I'll let my hair down and raise my hand and see whether I can get some questions in. But I don't know, dude. This is the way they do business now. They win a lot of football games. As Joe Flacco once said, we win a lot of games around here. They do win a lot of games around here. So I do defer to them on these kinds of things. And I think this is as important a hire, to your point, as you're going to make. They're John Harbaugh, Eric DeCosta, they're going all in and saying, this kid's good. This kid's going to win. This kid's going to the Hall. Like literally, that's what you do when you name a 34-year-old defensive coordinator. You really do, right?
Yeah, I mean, but there are a good many young coaches, and I mean, we're seeing young head coaches, we're seeing young coordinators. I mean, the one thing you could say about this is if he does too good of a job, he could be a head coach somewhere else next year. I mean, in all honesty, I'm not saying
like Johnny Bravo or Sean McVay.
Well, I mean, hey, people will tell you. I mean, and this is always some of the bias of managerial hires in baseball. They always talked about the good-looking managers always got the jobs quicker. More so than the guy that was a little more grizzled or older-looking, whatever.
How do you think Lou Baker wound up with the Indians that year? You know what I mean? It wasn't
Lou Brown, right?
Excuse me.
Yeah. But we'll have to see. I mean, again, I think anyone who's going to crush this hire or anyone who's going to bring effusive praise from an outsider perspective, I think it's very difficult to really know that. To your point with the pandemic, I mean, he wasn't here this past year. He did a nice job in Michigan. I don't want to downplay that. At the same time, comparing 2020, which was a really weird, truncated season in the Big Ten with the pandemic compared to 2021, lots of variables at work there. And, it helped that he had Aiden Hutchinson, who ended up being a Heisman Trophy finalist and is going to be one of the absolute top picks in the draft. So he had a really good player. Now, did he untap potential in Hutchinson that wasn't there in terms of, he had a 14-sack season. I think he had 4 or 5 career sacks his first couple years at Michigan. There you go. And maybe Mike Macdonald can do something similar with Odafe Owe in his second year. I think a big key, and this is where I come back to the players. this team's going to be under transition on the defensive side of the football. Let's think about it in terms of established high-end talent under contract right now. They have Marlon Humphrey. They have Marcus Peters, who's coming off of a serious knee injury, presumably is back, but does have a $10 million cap number. And I think it's at least worth pointing that out in the case of maneuvering and considering the salary cap. But beyond that, you're talking about a lot of young guys. Now, there are guys with upside when you look at OA. There are guys like Patrick Quinn, who's a first-round pick, who looked better the second half of 2021, but certainly over 2 years, wouldn't say that that's been a smashing success as a first-round pick. They have
how many of these cats does Macdonald know? I was thinking about that. Like, I'm thinking he knows Queen. He probably knows 7 or 8, but some of the guys he knows are going. That doesn't matter. But how they feel about him? Oh, he's going to be our guy. Okay, we like him. I mean, I would think that would be the vibe throughout most of it, because why else would you go and do this? I mean, I keep thinking they took a 34-year-old hotshot defensive coordinator. They're just in love with him. I mean, if I were out drinking with them in Indianapolis in 3 weeks at like, they would just, if it was old school, Phil Savage would roll up on me, or Kikina, hey, that guy, I watch him work. I watch him come in the building. I watched him come in the building when he was 27. I watched him when he was 29. I watched him when he was 31. We sent his ass out to Michigan, and Jim beat him up, and they won games. That's my guy. And I feel like that. I haven't talked to anybody, that. Like, so I have no insider on this, but my DNA of knowing John Harbaugh and going camping with him and knowing Eric DeCosta all these years, and more than that, knowing Bisciotti at Aerotech, to say, maybe what I recognized in you as a leader, right? Like, I mean, I took 1,000 resumes. You knew more about the Orioles and the Ravens than anybody. You're here. You're not teaching anymore. You haven't gone anywhere. So, like, there's a part of that where Bisciotti would say at Aerotech, we didn't let our best people go when they were 31 years old. We grew our company by keeping our best people when they're 30. We don't let them go to Michigan and Ohio State and let them go coach the Steelers and come kick our ass 4 years from now. We want that guy on our team. And it speaks volumes that George Kokinis is back, and probably that Phil Savage isn't, about how they really felt about Phil when Phil was unemployed, but also how Joe Douglas feels about Phil, that Phil's got a job, like those relationships that last a long time. And having Eric DeCosta seen Joe Douglas, Andy Weidel, seeing scouts, seeing coaches, seeing every Mike Nolan, Jack Del Rio, Mike Singletary, all of these people that came through here, the whole Billick tree, and, Eric and Brian are close, and like all of that, and knowing what they put into leadership and creating leaders, I'm telling you, man, this is a Bisciotti. This is their guy. We talk about where's Harbaugh's tree and all that. This is, to me, where that tree starts to get watered. And I'm starting to talk to you like Bisciotti was talking to Harbaugh. Find your guy. Find your guy. Make your legacy. You're going to the Hall of Pretty Good. You got $100 million. You got 5 more years on the clock. I'm going to give you another deal. I'm going to own the team for a couple years. Steve doesn't, and they just had a retreat. Steve doesn't want to sell the team to a schmuck, and Steve doesn't want to do any more hiring or firing or having blood on his hands or having CNN hanging out in the building saying, where's the owner, because my player's punching his wife in an elevator. Like, Steve hated all of that, but now I can hear Steve cracking the whip on 8 and 9 and 6 losses in a row. And John, here's your contract, but you lead men. Go find a tree. And to me, that's what this is. So that's my deep thought for the day. How about that? Got more out of me than you thought you were going to get, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's deep because I'll also point out that
deep because that's what they put into it. They have to. It is really deep for them.
But I would also say the guy that they just threw out of the boat had led the best scoring defense in the NFL from 2018 through 2020, and suddenly
there was unhappiness.
Well,
somebody was unhappy with somebody, and Wink probably knew what the next boat is for him, right? I mean, whatever job Wink's going to get, Wink's not going to be shocked by that, because I think it really was probably mutual, right? I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of that either, because I'd only be guessing. I'd literally only be guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the mutual thing's a cop-out 99.8% of the time. I mean, look, Do I think Wink Martindale's devastated and crying at his home right now? No. Do I think that this was completely mutual? Not really. I think the contract thing is convenient to talk about. If you really want to keep someone, you extend them. Steve Bisciotti's a billionaire. Like this isn't something where paying your defensive coordinator is going to put you out if he leaves to take a head coaching job or if you fire him next year. So they clearly like Mike Macdonald. I'm not going to dispute that, and I'm not going to say he's going to do a poor job, or I don't know if he's going to do a great job. It goes back to what I said. They need more talent on the defensive side of the ball because a lot of guys that they've been counting on were either hurt this past year or in many cases are going to be moving on or have moved on over the last couple of years. I mean, take a look. And I'm working on this in my latest 12 Ravens thoughts at BaltimorePositive.com. Just go back to 2019, the 14-2 team. That team that was invincible, won 12 in a row. We all thought they were going to win the Super Bowl. Nestor, out of the 46 guys that were active for that divisional round playoff loss to Tennessee, 46 guys active on game day, 16 are currently under contract. Now, some guys like Bradley Bozeman or Patrick Ricard, could they still re-sign them and bring them back? Of course. But my point is, when the Ravens were at the pinnacle in the regular season 2 years ago, and everyone's saying, wow, they've got a second-year unanimous MVP quarterback, and they're 14-2, the best team in franchise history for the regular season, wins in a row. This is a dynasty, right? I mean, this team's going to win the Super Bowl. They're going to have a chance to win multiple Super Bowls.
Doesn't turn his ankle, and as long as the running back situation stays good, and as long as they can replace Marshall Yonda, as long as nobody in the secondary gets hurt, and as long as this kid Quinn steps up, and as long as the 30-somethings they have on the defensive line hold up, and as long as the quarterback doesn't run the ball 21 times in November and then have to come back and play 4 days later, and as long as he gets vaccinated so that he winds up being able to play. Dude, boom. There you go. You're 8-9. You lost 6 games in a row, John. Listen, I don't think Wink was the problem. And I don't even know that John believes that. I think they believe, well, Wink, you got 1 year left on the deal. You want to be a head coach anyway. And we're just going to agree to disagree, and you can find a different situation. And I think for these guys who are nomadic in general, they look at these assignments as not lifetime assignments, right? And I mean, even in Rex Ryan's case, he was here a long time. Rex Ryan spent more of his life in Baltimore than he spent any other place in his life, and that includes running around with his dad. You know what I mean? There aren't 8 and 10-year jobs almost anywhere, and that's why Marvin spent a life in Cincinnati. For not winning at the end, it's astonishing. I mean, Mike Tomlin, Peyton leaving last week. I mean, whatever they're going to do the next stop, and that's not who Jim Harbaugh is, right? Jim Harbaugh's San Diego to Stanford, but I think that's who John Harbaugh is, and I think John likes the stability of all of this and fell into the right organization with the right people. And I think they're all moving up the tree, and now they're all 50-something or 60-something or 70-something on the executive side, and change is blowing. And I think they identified this guy who has been in the building at 4 a.m., out at midnight. They've watched him from a young guy growing up, and they say, it's your time. And we'd rather go with that, which is so Harbaugh'ian, so Bisciotti. We'd rather go with that than the next 58-year-old defensive coordinator who's probably a genius, who probably will make less mistakes. You know what I mean? I had Jason Cole on this week, right? And I had Clark Judge. By the way, Luke is here. All are presented by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Go get the coffee. Do what Justin Tucker tells you. Watch out for the snow. I had some chicken tenders the other night. Threw them over salad. Delicious. So anyway, what was I talking? I lost my train of thought.
You're talking to Jason Cole
about veteran coaches kicking the asses of younger coaches. Why Matt LaFleur's not winning. In-game coaching decisions, old guys, sage guys, Belichick guys, situationally they see things, which is, I guess, why Herm Edwards is bringing Brian Billick and, Marvin Lewis in to oversee different things in whatever department you're in. When you're a leader, that's what you do. I think that makes it interesting to me to hear that older coaches, there is some sage in there that you might want to move that around a little bit. So if you have a young coordinator, you might want some veteran people around. I don't know who that is at this point for John or for this staff, or even if that's what they desire at this point, whether they really feel like it's a young man's game in the locker room with getting the players and technology and different things like that. In the same way you've experienced this with baseball, where there's just, I mean, Buck getting a job is just, I don't know what Buck's been doing the last 3-4 years. I don't think it's probably brushing up on the technology part, but that would also be part of this, is younger people and younger technology. But again, this speaks to, in many, many ways, who they are and what they do, and bringing a young guy in that they saw as a superstar. And that's, to my way of thinking, that's what they see. They're saying this guy might be the next Ravens head coach, because he's that guy and we've trained him that way, and he's in the Bisciotti system because that's the way this rolls if Steve's going to continue to own the team.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. But like I said, if he's too good too soon, might not be in Baltimore. He might be coaching the Atlanta Falcons or whoever it might be. So we'll see.
Quinn going back into his shell, huh? I mean, these coaches, all of these seats are like, Wink's going to get a job, but like everybody thought Dan Quinn was going to get a job. He held his nose at all of these gigs, right? Literally.
But I think you get a different perspective though when you've done it. And even when you've done it, and in his case had some success, but then it goes sideways, I think there has to be something to the sense. And of course, timing is everything. You don't know what these coaches' family situations are. You know, financially, you think most of them are in good shape because, he's a head coach. He's made 7 figures, assuming. But there's so many different factors at work: health, age, all those different things that I do think there is something look at Josh McDaniels, who has been with Belichick again for a decade after he went out to Denver for a year and it didn't work out, or a year plus, whatever it was. So sometimes you have these situations where,
I remember Richie,
especially for a guy who's been a head, but I'm saying for these guys who've been a head coach, and whether they have some moderate success or whether it doesn't work out, I think there is something to the idea of, I've got a good gig here. I'm going to be a little more picky about this. And, think about it. He stays in Dallas. He's got Micah Parsons, who defensive rookie of the year, a guy that, if not for TJ Watt and Aaron Donald, defensive player of the year, maybe. I mean, that's how good he is. So you have that kind of Ray Lewis-like figure to build around on your defense. You're thinking, you know what? I don't think our defense is going to fall apart these next couple of years. So I can be a little picky here, or maybe my family situation will be different a year from now. There's just so many factors at work. But, to go back to Mike Macdonald, look, I think some of what we're talking about, we're putting the cart way before the horse. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. They clearly like him. That's obvious. When you look at him getting the job over some of the other guys they interviewed, other guys that they're intimately familiar with. But I'll still go back to, and this is the same thing that we could talk about with Wink. Ravens had way more talented, available football players from 2018 through 2020, had the best scoring defense in the NFL. Wink looked like a genius. Everyone was talking about Wink's scheme and blitzes and, organized chaos brought back to Baltimore, a guy who's a Buddy Ryan pupil, Rex Ryan pupil, and all of that. And then a couple of those guys go away, and Marcus Peters gets hurt before the season starts. LJ Fort gets hurt before the season starts. Derek Wolfe doesn't even play in 2021. You lose Marlon Humphrey in early December. Brandon Williams misses a chunk of the middle of the season.
Go down the list. Can't play in the middle.
Well, but I'm just talking about the available pieces that suddenly aren't available anymore. And Wink doesn't look as smart anymore. And look, again, some of the other factors you laid out there, I don't disagree. But the point is what? Comes down to the players. And I'll say right now, the state of their defense as it is constructed right now with players under contract, it's not a very good defense. You like the corners, but there's not enough depth there. You'd still like to have a higher playmaking safety. The inside and outside linebacker is a question now, especially with Tyus Bowser tearing his Achilles in the finale. And you're kind of wondering what his availability and effectiveness is going to be going into 2022. So, defensive line needs to be completely rebuilt. Other than Justin Matabike, I feel pretty good about him being their 3 technique. I don't know what's going to look like. Is Mike Macdonald going to continue a 2-gap system? Or are they going to go to a 1-gap system and change things up in that way? I mean, we'll find out all the answers to these questions, but it's still, I'll go back to what Wink said for years and years and years. it's about the players at the end of the day. And yeah, you can scheme things up and you want to avoid patterns. And did the Ravens rely on the blitz too much, or did they take too many chances with cover zero in the secondary? And we talked about this. I talked about some examples where I kind of scratched my head this year, given some of the personnel and how aggressive they were at some key moments. But by and large, it's about the players. Wink always talked about that. And that's why his players loved him so much, because he was a guy that, as much as he carried some of that Rex Ryan swagger, anytime he was offered praise, he would bring the attention back to the players. And I think if there's one thing Mike Macdonald can take from Wink, even though their personalities are very different, in a little bit of interaction I've had with Mike Macdonald, not much, a couple podium sessions with him as a linebackers coach a couple years back, but I think it's going to be very player centric. Ultimately it's your defense. Yeah, you got to make the calls, you got to make the tough decisions, but that credit goes to the guys that are out there on the field. It's about the Jimmies and the Joes, right? Not the X's and O's at the end of the day. And yeah, they're going to tweak. They're going to do some different things. Like I said, do they go from long-held two-gap system under John Harbaugh with the various coordinators? Maybe they change that up and they go a little bit smaller, more athletic, a little more predicated on speed up front. We'll see. But it's certainly going to be interesting. And to your point, and I agree with this, it's clear they very much like this guy, because Anthony Weaver's been a defensive coordinator. Joe Cullen was here for a long time before going to be a coordinator in Jacksonville, even though it didn't work out very well. They hired Wink, who had been a coordinator in Denver, some years back. It didn't go well there. So they've hired guys who didn't necessarily have this overwhelming successful resume at the NFL level, even as a coordinator. So clearly they weren't scared of that. And in this case, they went younger. It's going to be interesting because, again, Wink, Dean Pease, Greg Madison, they were all guys who weren't retired. I mean, in Pease's case, he had retired and then came out of retirement 3 weeks later, but that's neither here nor there. But, Wink was, it's not like Wink was nearing retirement age. Let's be clear about that. So in this case, when you do hire someone younger, and yeah, it's cyclical as far as younger coaches, older coaches, head coaching candidates, all those different things. We know there's a new flavor of the month every year in terms of what's really valued. But in this case, it will be interesting because, as I said, Mike Macdonald turns this thing around, and he got so much praise at Michigan, turned around the Wolverines defense. If he turns around the Ravens defense, and let's say they go 12-5, and they've got a top 5 defense,
Browns next year,
he very well could be. You don't know. So that was always kind of the rationale. If you remember different names like Adam Gase and some other guys that either interviewed with Harbaugh or had been linked as an offensive coordinator, because we talked about that side of the ball so much more. But there was always that thought of, you don't want to hire that guy that you're just grooming for a year to become a head coach somewhere else. You'd like to get a coordinator who, you want a guy who does the job first and foremost and does it well. But in a case of hiring some of these older assistants, there was a thought that they might be here for 5 or 10 years, and that might not be a bad thing. So it is interesting to see that at least slight pivot in thinking in terms of going so much younger here. But again, Ravens have a lot of work to do. Eric DeCosta would be the first to tell you that Mike Macdonald, having him back, great. We all like him. We're optimistic about it, but need more good football players on the defensive side, because some guys have moved on that they've really leaned on big time here in recent years. And with some of the contracts they've already given out, and knowing that they have a quarterback extension looming, whether it's this offseason, next year, whatever, there's not going to be at quite as many cap dollars accessible to devote to that defense. So it's going to be younger. They're going to need better scheme, more creative scheme, whatever, all those different variables. It's going to be a little more challenging than it was these last couple of years, where they had devoted so much money to the defensive side of the football.
Drinking Rofo coffee, talking Ravens football, headed to, what is the Super Bowl 50? I can't read Roman numerals. Are we 50?
Is it 50? I think it's 56 now, isn't it?
56, right? Because we were 47. I said 53 the other day, and I'm like, no, I did the math wrong. And I'm like, no, that's not right. I'll figure it out before I get there. And, Luke, you'll appreciate this, and we'll probably do some radio next week as we have these press conferences and stuff. But was talking to my wife about going out to L.A., and I'm going alone this time, and she's dropped me off the airport. And, we're living out in the county now, so, like, getting to the airport's a lot. So I say, I drop me off 4 o'clock in the morning and get out there, and she's like, man, get out of bed. Yeah, I'm like, listen, You got to get out of bed early. The Pro Bowl's that day, you know? I mean, so.
Which, by the way, no Lamar Jackson. Chris
Oh,
Mortensen reported that
imagine
Lamar
that.
will not play, which I think we all expected that, but not official, but a word is leaked out, and I think we knew a bone bruise. Hey, this was not a low ankle sprain; it was a bone bruise, and Lamar confirmed that the day after the season ended. And good to see that he's not going to be trying to push to play in a meaningless exhibition game that people will watch anyway because it's the NFL, and anything you slap the shield on anything, people will watch it. That's one thing that amazes me, and I say that as someone who loves football, but they will watch it, and that's why the Pro Bowl continues despite the fact that it is absolutely terrible entertainment.
Do you think they're going to hand me an NFL logoed mask that's NK95? You think?
I'm guessing I don't know if it'll be there'll be something that
I told Dennis it's a great time to get me a Coons mask, and I got some lottery mask here. I told John that last week. So yeah, it's time to mask up out in LA for me next week with sponsors everywhere.
I think it'll be something that's probably more, if you think about the gift bags that they give the media and we're pulling back the curtain here a little bit, it's always something host city oriented. So I'm guessing you'll get some kind of LA
Hollywood
kind of mask.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, there you go.
I need a palm tree. We're going to continue on around here. I am Nestor. He is Luke. You can find him, Baltimore Luke, anywhere the internet is served. And obviously, I'm out there on, LinkedIn, Facebook, the Instagram, all that stuff, and YouTube. All of our work is out now at BaltimorePositive.com, where we have a podcast, audio vault, all the stuff we do. Don Moeller and I got together. We had a great conversation with John Feinstein about raise a fist, take a knee. Awesome conversations all along the political scope last week, as well as the arts, with Ron Legler from the Hippodrome talking about the upcoming shows there in Dear Evan Hansen, as well as Tootsie. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking. Baltimore positively defense.